Licensed games. We love them or we hate them. Actually, come to think of it, we usually just kind of ignore them. Games based on licensed properties, whether they be tie-in products for an upcoming movie or just an interactive billboard for fast food, are generally a known quantity to most gamers. There are the token few at the top of the heap that are excellent titles in their own right, the considerable middle tier of generic cash grabs that vanish from the public consciousness as soon as they're out, and of course, the ones that are actual garbage. But there exists a fourth category as well, one outside a simple structuring of tiers, and that's the games that are just so weird that it's actually hard to know where they fall in terms of quality. Whether they're based on unusual subject matter or just make some unique choices with their gameplay, these are the licensed titles that are worth a second look, if only because you can't believe you saw it right the first time. I'm Peter from TripleJump, and here are the 10 weirdest licensed video games of all time. Number 10. Journey. Journey is a fantastic indie game released in 2012 that allowed players to explore a mysterious world and interact with strangers in a uniquely minimalist style that... Oh wait, sorry, no, I'm talking about the wrong game here. Journey was an arcade game released in 1983 that was not in fact a fantastic minimalist adventure, but instead a collection of mini-games based on the classic rock band Journey. In each level, the player controls a different member of the band as they try to retrieve their instruments through a series of tasks, including avoiding lasers, bouncing off trampolines, and whatever this is supposed to be. In the game's final level, the band puts on a concert as the player takes control of their bodyguard to keep a crowd of ravenous space alien fans from rushing the stage. While games based on popular rock bands were somewhat common at the time, see the Kiss-branded pinball game or the arcade shooter featuring Aerosmith, Journey is easily the weirdest of the bunch, just because of how odd the game looks in motion. The sprites, featuring digitized photos of the band's faces pasted onto cartoony-looking bodies, looks like something from a bootleg, not an official release, and the end result will likely leave even the most hardcore Journey fans hard-pressed to not stop believing. Number 9. WWE Crush Hour. It's been said there are no new ideas in the world, that every new creation is actually a recreation, a reimagining of something that's already been done before. That may be true, but at least most of them aren't as blatant about it as WWE Crush Hour was. WWE games are hardly rare, whether it be the classic favourites or the modern series of annual releases, so it's never a complicated matter to get your fix of the virtual graps. But what if there was a game where the wrestlers did something other than wrestle? Let's say, driving cars. Such was the premise of WWE Crush Hour, a vehicular combat game featuring a roster made up of wrestlers active in the WWE at the time. The game itself is nothing to write home about, largely because it's essentially a carbon copy of Twisted Metal with the serial numbers filed off. It has a bit of WWE paint slapped on in the form of voiceovers from the actual talent and themed arenas, but the whole wrestling veneer could be swapped out for any other licensed property and the game would still feel just as out of place. All it really does is make you either want to play Twisted Metal or watch a wrestling show, without satisfying either of those two urges. Number 8. Street Fighter the Movie. For as bad of a reputation as video games based on movies might have, movies based on video games seem to have an even worse stink about them, or at least they did until very recently. So imagine if there were a video game based on a movie based on a video game. The film, known as Street Fighter the Movie, based on the classic fighting game franchise, was released in 1994 to a lukewarm reception, both critically and commercially, though not because of the performance of Raul Julia as M. Bison. He was flawless. For whatever reason, someone had the brilliant idea to make a game based on the movie, never mind the fact there were already more than half a dozen Street Fighter games available at the time, some even released within the same year. Street Fighter the movie The Game is a sharp departure from the rest of the series, eschewing the familiar anime-styled character designs in favour of sprites made from the digitised likenesses of the actors from the movie a la Mortal Kombat. The effect can most politely be described as odd, and when coupled with the title's unique mechanics and new takes on classic characters, the game based on the movie ended up being quite a different beast from the games the movie was based on. Number 7. Blues Brothers 2000. Whoever said that classics never go out of style obviously never played Blues Brothers 2000, because this game went out of style before it was even released. Based on the sequel to the classic 1980s movie, The Blues Brothers, the video game adaptation of Blues Brothers 2000 was released in the year 2000, which sounds fitting until you realise the movie it's based on was released in 1998, a full 2 years earlier. Any popularity the movie might have had, which wasn't much, was long gone by the time the game came out. It might not have made much difference either way though, as the game barely resembles its source material at all, something that one look at the box art will tell you. Players control protagonist Elwood Blues as he jumps and dances his way through a series of platforming stages with intermittent rhythm game segments, all while collecting notes like a cheap Banjo-Kazooie knockoff, something you'd probably have a much better time playing, if I'm honest. Enemies include Venus flytraps, giant spiders, and evil sentient trees, which, hang on, let me just check. Yep, as I thought, none of which appear in the movie. Of course, the fact that the game is from the same developers as Superman 64 might have been a bit of a hint as to what we were getting into here. Number 6. Pepsi Man. Few things help to sell a product better than a recognisable mascot. Just ask Ronald McDonald or Colonel Sanders. Some mascots then get their very own video game, but no branded mascot video game has been quite as weird as the utter madness that is Pepsi Man. Appearing in Japanese ads for Pepsi products, Pepsi Man was portrayed as a superhero who helps people in need by bringing cans of Pepsi to anyone suffering from thirst, proving that not all heroes wear capes. His self-titled video game builds on this concept, while also borrowing liberally from the Crash Bandicoot games, as Pepsi Man barrels through obstacle-laden levels interspersed by live-action scenes of a man drinking Pepsi and eating snacks. Since it was developed on a shoestring budget, Pepsi Man went all in on the weirdness factor instead of production values. Everything in the game feels like it's turned up to 11, from the caricatures of Americana to the mind-numbing amount of product placement throughout. Despite its origins though, Pepsi Man has become something of a cult classic that's loved by fans today and even helped inspire the modern endless runner genre. Kids these days might think the Burger King games were the height of weird mascot titles, but in reality, Pepsi Man walked so that the king could run. Well, technically, Pepsi Man was running and the king was sneaking, so that's actually completely wrong. Number 5. Shaq Fu, A Legend Reborn. Shaquille O'Neal has done just about everything there is for a celebrity to do. He's been a pro wrestler, he's been a rapper, he's starred in a mediocre superhero movie, and all of this on top of a legendary basketball career. And yet despite these accolades, he will always be known, to us at least, for Shaq Fu. It's a title that's become the stuff of legend among gaming fans. A game so bad that it ended up becoming somewhat ironically beloved. Even so, what it probably didn't need was a sequel, and yet Shaq Fu, A Legend Reborn exists. Unlike its fighting game predecessor though, A Legend Reborn is more of a beat-em-up that invents new lore about the backstory of Shaq, his Shaq story, if you will. While one could somewhat understand the appeal of releasing a game with the name value of a bankable star in the 90s, releasing a sequel to it decades later seems a much more dubious prospect, although it still attracted hundreds of thousands of dollars in crowdfunding. There's that ironic love again, I suppose. And hey, just to top off the weirdness, if you ever get tired of looking at Shaquille O'Neal's face, never worry. There's a DLC campaign that lets you play as former US President Barack Obama fighting to defeat Kanye West. I honestly don't think I could have made that up if I tried. Number 4. Super Godzilla. The king of the monsters has had a bit of a checkered history when it comes to video games. Pretty much any time he's starred in a brawler, the result has been good fun. But when he dips his school bus-sized toe into other genres, things get a bit more iffy. Super Godzilla was a game released for, you guessed it, the Super Nintendo, because I think every series was legally required to have a game on the Super Nintendo with the word Super in the title, where the player controls Godzilla as he stomps through various cityscapes, wreaking havoc and destruction everywhere he goes. In theory, a solid concept. In practice, not so much. At its core, Super Godzilla is mostly a strategy game where the player controls Godzilla's path via an overhead map, while the top half of the screen shows an ongoing cinematic of Godzilla's current actions. At the end of each stage, you do get to fight a boss, though the battle mostly consists of timed button presses to trigger a brief cutscene. In the end, Super Godzilla is a kaiju game that's somehow more fun to watch than it is to play. God, just give us another fighting game where we can throw buildings at each other, will ya? Is that so much to ask? Number 3. The Mummy Demastered. The assignment: develop a tie-in game based on an upcoming movie. The problem: you can't use the likeness of the movie's lead actor in said game. The solution: create arguably one of the best licensed movie games of all time. The Mummy Demastered was developed to release in conjunction with the 2017 movie The Mummy starring Tom Cruise. You know, the one with that trailer that had all the sound missing. But, due to a clause in Mr. Cruise's contract prohibiting his likeness from being used in merchandising, the developers had to get creative. The finished product is a retro-styled Metroidvania action platformer where the main character is a nameless, faceless agent charged with infiltrating the mummy's lair to destroy the evil within. The Mummy Demastered certainly looks and plays differently from the droves of other low-effort tie-in games that movies usually get, but what makes it really weird is just how good it actually is. Much of that can be credited to the pedigree of its developers at WayForward, the creators of the Shantae series, who managed to craft an excellent game that stands entirely on its own. Really, this would actually work quite well even without a movie attached. It's an impressive feat, especially considering that with the reception of its source material, many would have expected its video game to be, dead on arrival. That's a sort of vaguely mummy-related joke, in case it wasn't clear. Number 2. Def Jam Vendetta. Music and video games have enjoyed a long and successful relationship together, not counting that Journey game from earlier, as the rhythm game genre has blossomed over the decades and helped fans discover songs and bands they may have otherwise missed out on. Def Jam, a record label known for representing some of the most influential rap artists of all time, probably had similar goals of crossover appeal when they put Def Jam Vendetta into production. But rather than going down the simple route of making a standard music game, they instead decided to throw a bunch of their talent into the ring and let them duke it out against each other. Def Jam Vendetta plays like a classic wrestling game, but features a roster composed primarily of hip-hop artists signed to Def Jam at the time, and also featured an elaborate story mode with multiple protagonists and light RPG elements of all things. The whole thing sounds like an idea concocted by a sleep-deprived intern with a deadline to meet, and yet miraculously, it all somehow works. Def Jam Vendetta, would you believe, got top marks from reviewers, would you believe, and would spawn an even better sequel. Perhaps they could teach Journey a thing or two. And number 1, Darkened Sky. Here's a fun little game we can play. Let me describe the premise of Darkened Sky and see if you can guess what licensed property the game is based on. Trust me, it's harder than you think. The game takes place in a dark fantasy world and follows the adventures of a young woman fittingly named Sky, who travels the realm in search of her mother. Along the way, she joins forces with a smart-mouthed gargoyle and eventually finds herself in conflict with an evil wizard, battling against his minions with her trusty staff and an arsenal of magical spells. So, what do you think? I'll tell you, it's not based on a movie or a book or even a record label this time. Last few seconds. Give up? The answer is Darkened Sky is a tie-in game for Skittles. You know, the rainbow-coloured sweets. You can't even be blamed for not knowing, since not even the cover of the game makes mention of the product it's supposedly trying to shill, and yet Skittles play an important role in the game's story, essentially serving as powerful magical artifacts. And that's by design, as the game's director, Elizabeth Braswell, deliberately tried to make the game both as fun as possible and as far removed from the Skittles brand as she could get. Certainly an unusual choice for a tie-in product, but you have to respect the commitment to quality gaming, if nothing else.